We will now proceed to MP Ali. MP Ali, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to Dr. Sabreena. Thank you for your time, and thank you what you do for the community. My question is regarding that, like immigrants worldwide start life in one culture, and after immigrating, spend the rest of their lives in another, generally quite a different culture. They start off as insider in their culture of origin with an understanding of its norm and mores. After immigrating, they're outsider in the new culture and are able to maintain some insider status in the subculture communities of their fellow immigrants from their country of origin. Is there any type of training we can offer immigration department personnel that would be effective in allowing them to share in the culture of origin insiderness of the applicants whose cases they are considering, or can they only be achieved by hiring immigration officers from among Canadians who are from those same ethnic and national subcultures?
Thank you very much for that question. I'll try and keep it as succinct as possible. So what you're speaking about is this idea of cultural competence training, which actually has received a lot of criticism over the years, because we've come to realize that no one can be competent in another culture. You could be aware, but you can't gain competence. So that's why my recommendations are more towards diversifying the pool of officers so that those who have already existing understanding and awareness of another culture can provide their experience and their expertise. And it's not for not having enough of these people in the department. We clearly know from the Polaro report that there are, diversity is okay. And I've heard this from even yesterday in a meeting. I heard from somebody working in IRCC that the composition of the department appears to be diverse. The problem is that the people in the decision-making roles, they are not from those cultures and those regions. So the people who have the power in making the decision aren't culturally aware. So this is why my kind of recommendations about training, I'm quite skeptical of training, because you can't really train someone in someone else's culture. But what you can do is train them in an awareness. And something that I was going to say but didn't have time for is that, these training modules that we have online, these diversity, equity, inclusion training modules, they're like, people just click to the next. They don't actually retain any information. It's very easy to get trained, get a certificate, but really know nothing about what you just read. So, my recommendation is for engaged training, which is more workshop style, where you have people who are conversing with other people with other lived experiences, where you're posed ethical questions. As a professor, that's what I do in my classroom. I pose ethical questions that make people think outside the box. And by the end of the session, they understand a little better the other perspective. And again, due to the pandemic, I feel like ideas and perspectives are even more polarized, right? People are even more so on two ends, two extremes. The only way that we can come together is if we are engaged in discussion, in the same room, on the same web session, but, in conversation rather than some training module online. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Ghaffar. My next question is, in the next few days, I will be speaking with an organization in my riding, which the Minister of Mental Health has recently funded to operate a crisis line supporting the South Asian community across Ontario. Would you have any words of advice that I could pass on to them about dealing with mental health problems created by racism and Islamophobia?
Absolutely, and I think everybody in this room remembers the tragedy that took place in London, Ontario with the Afzal family. And one thing that I like to point to is that even though that was an incident of Islamophobia, we know that the person who committed the crime was coming from a place of Islamophobic hate. But one thing that people tend to not understand is that he actually didn't know if they were Muslims. He suspected they were Muslims simply by the way they were dressed. They were dressed exactly the same as a Sikh family would have been, or a Hindu family would have been. So, Islamophobia actually impacts people from across regions around the world, because there's a misunderstanding of who's Muslim, who's not Muslim. And Sikhs often are, just like the first man to be attacked after 9/11 in the US in New York was a Sikh man who was mistaken for a Muslim man, and he was shot and killed. So the point I'm trying to make is that South Asians, because of Islamophobia, as well as because of anti-South Asian, anti-immigrant hate, are on the receiving end of a lot of discrimination. And young people especially, coming of age and identity are even more so affected. So we are finding, even in my research, that young people are very troubled. They're very scared. I mean, if somebody's scared to even go out for a walk with their family, what does that say about their sense of well-being and belonging in Canada? So yes, I agree with you. Those type of programs are very necessary, and we need to focus on them.